So I will try to tell story of my family, and I think it comes trendy because as Christians we expect to extend ourselves and understand also other people's background. And I think my story comes useful in this sense because it's not just typical story. Sometimes we are just expect stories that is similar to our own upbringing. But in this case, you will be dealing also with a story of Russian people and Jewish people because I mixed background, and that's I think helpful for us since we come across as future clergy, especially of people of very different backgrounds, right? So you're looking at this photo right now, and this photo was taken in 1920s, and in the center you are seeing my grandfather and grandmother, and a girl in the photo is my mother, right? So my mother was born in 1931, and my grandfather Mikhail was born in 1895, and my grandmother was born in 1904, right? So all of them were born in Belarus because after the partition of Poland, uh, uh, Belarus became part of Russia, and there was big Jewish population there. So, but before that, before 18th century, no Jews was allowed to settle in Russia. But one of the things that can be considered positive as a positive outcome of the revolution, but of course it's mixed outcome, was that Jewish were allowed to settle throughout Russia, and this photo was already taken in Moscow. So they moved from Belarus to Moscow, and my grandmother became a doctor, and my grandfather became a math teacher in a school, right? So they kind of became a middle class, and you are seeing also my grandmother father, who is still kind of traditional Orthodox Jewish looking man on this photo. And you are seeing also that my grandmother and grandfather, they became secular. And a gentleman on this photo at the left is my grandmother brother, who, as many others, immigrated to America around 1915. But when he learned about revolution in Russia, he came back from America and became and involved with all revolutionary processes there. And surprisingly, he never was arrested and died in his birthday. Right. So this kind of uh, more long history. So you are seeing again my grandfather and grandmother about the same year. They kind of looking bourgeois, and it's interesting because this photo was taken in 1920s, but you are kind of not really seeing them as what you expect to see from kind of communist inspired people, because this photo could be taken elsewhere, like in America, in the West, and it also gives you idea that many people, they use this time, this opportunity to advance in lives, and they also have this had the same goals, sort of to be better off, and so, and you can see it even in the Soviet Union. And this photo was probably taken during late new economic policy. Remember this new economic policy that was introduced by Lenin around 1922, and this policy allowed people to have some private business, and also they were allowed to buy fancy clothes and don't just look as communists expected, as communists in China. You can see them all in similar uniform and so on, and that was changed in the 1920s, and you can see this change on this photo, right? So, okay, this is a huge leap in time, and this is my mother, and photo is taking somewhere, I'm guessing 1970s. So, my mother was born, as I mentioned, in 1931, and during the war, she had to leave Moscow and go to the Urals, to the Urals, and she spent like 2 years and a half there in the Urals going to school, right? And I mentioned previously that the war had impact on my family, because I don't have photo actually. That's something I should have included here. A photo of my mother-in-law, who passed away 1 year and a half in Moscow. And my mother was born in 1931. So my mother-in-law was born in 1934, also in Moscow. But and both girls, my mother-in-law and my mother, they had to leave Moscow. And as I mentioned, my mother went to the Urals, and Tatiana, my mother's mother, she left to the small village near Tula, in the Tula region, which is like around 200 kilometers from Moscow. And her village was taken by Germans, so she experienced quite harsh German occupation there in the village, right? So it kind of gives also idea about proximity of the war and why war does matter. So I'm not really very much in favor of reminding about the war all the time, as maybe is the case right now. And sort of it's emphasizing, it's something that keeps the nation together. But I understand why this happens, right? And will be mentioning my father, who was a pilot, and so there will be photo of him as well. So my mother had limited opportunities where to enroll in school, in higher education school, because people of Jewish background, after the war, they had less choices. So she only could enroll in a couple of universities, and as a result, she became an engineer in chemistry. And this photo is taken at her working place in the institute where she worked most of her working life. So she started in the early 1950s, and she retired in 1985. So we are talking about like 35 years in the workforce. And she received very meager retirement pension. And she hasn't been paid from her employer, but only like a social security check. That's the only what she received based on her time in the workforce, right? So, and she sports a fancy dress, and kind of this also demonstrates that people try to follow fashions. She has nice hair. Uh, how you called it? She has nicely done hair there, and it also gives you ideas that people try to follow fashions in the Soviet Union. They also try to stay tuned regarding various trends as much as they can get access. And those trends, of course, would come from the West, right? So Western culture, Western popular culture became, for many, especially people of my generation, something to look at, to consider something not standard, but sort of something you want to go after. And that's also interesting because the country during my growth was still quite ideological. You would see posters with Lenin and Stalin and Marx, very often on the streets. You are expected to be a believer in the Soviet, in the communist ideology, but sort of while you would pay lip service to this, right? And I think it's happened somewhere in my teenage years that you kind of started to lose faith in this quote unquote communist religion and started to think, okay, there is another reality outside of the Soviet Union, and you wanted to learn more about this and you want to join this. That sort of would be my story, which kind of interestingly twist, right? That I'm in Jordanville, but connected with the Russian Church with all my life. So we are moving to the next photo, and here we are seeing me, right? I don't know at the age. Can you guys see? Can you hear me? Can you see stuff? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yes, we can see everything.
Okay, so you are seeing me, I don't know, it's like age of 3. Right. Okay. Okay.
Father, is that a Aeroflot hat?
No, this is my father's this my colonel's, it's his colonel's head. Yeah, because as I mentioned, my father, he was a military pilot, and he retired earlier because of that. So, and that's while he was still in the Air Force. So I'm having his head here, and we used to have our own house, which kind of was quite, how to say, quite a step forward, right? Instead of having a flat. So, and there is typical Russian or Soviet sign on the door, warning about the dog. So, and that's kind of how I appear in this presentation for the first time. Okay, and as a child, right? As a child, I was entitled to have a free kindergarten, and of course, also same as here, there would be free elementary school and free high school. But at the same time, there also was free medicine, something that many people now would, how to say, would cherish sort of memories about various free vacations. Sort of people were poor, right? But more or less they were evenly poor, and that was something that I think people appreciated. So there wasn't this unequal spread of wealth, right? Which is sort of normal for capitalist the system which depends on competition and so on, but sort of there was an attempt that everybody would be more or less similar. You have an apartment, a flat in an apartment building, and when I started to work after school, I used to make 140 rubles a month, and my mother, she probably made 270 or 300 rubles, right? But at the same time, it would take five kopecks to go on a subway, or like 2 kopecks to buy you a glass of a glass of seltzer water. So therefore, kind of 300 rubles was kind of, I would say, maybe around $2,000 sort of buying power, comparing with modern situation. Right. So we are moving farther. We are moving farther, and try to find me on that picture. And you are seeing me. You are seeing a typical Soviet kindergarten. So this probably was day of the Soviet Revolution, of the Russian Revolution in November. So everybody dress up and everybody performs, right? So when children were reading poems that they memorized for this occasion, and you see again an icon, quote unquote, in the middle. right? So everything is decorated, sort of like it nowadays would be for Christmas or Easter, Pascha, and here we are seeing sort of the Soviet feast, right? So it's shortly before the school, and normally people would go, people would send their children to kindergartens because they had to work. And some people, like I mean, my wife, she used to be for 5 days in kindergarten because her mother uh, could not afford having her at home. And also another thing that comes in the picture here, that the Soviet family, they normally would not have more than one child at this time, right? So I was this, I mean, I had a half brother, right? But I grew up in my mother family, so and that's kind of was normal to have one child, and then it's also was normal to send this child to pre-kindergartens and to kindergarten. Basically, interaction with parents would be quite minimal because they would only see you on evenings, right? So we are moving a little bit farther, and you are seeing it's 1975. This is my first day at school, right? And I am actually there, right? If you didn't identify me, I'm here, right at the very right corner of this picture. And here you are seeing me once again on the first day of school, and it was 1975, and it was the year when a uniform was changed. So you are seeing a friend of mine, Alyosha, who was still having old uniform, and since those old uniform either was not available or we already wanted to get the new one, so I'm still in my clothes, right? So and expecting when this uniform will be available. And this is also was a newly built school, and our class was the first class of the school. And we are talking about a suburb of Moscow, like 20 kilometers from Moscow. That's where I grew up. Okay, so now we are seeing something that illustrates me, sort of showing off with with an English dictionary at the age of 16, 17. So at the age of 16, 17, right? And it was toward end of my high school, and everybody went to universities or uh, to some other schools, and I baptized at the end of this year, right? So that's kind of became my university at this point, right? What is what's going on here? Hmm. Sorry for the troubles. Okay. Yeah. So and you are seeing also my mother and my grandmother and her sister, right? Already later in the years, in our apartment in a suburb of Moscow. And my grandmother's sister Maya, she was never married because her sweetheart was killed during the war, right? So she used to live with us and helping us out. Uh, and next would be myself and my mother in the same apartment with my father, right? Who was born in the same place or grew up in the same place from where Anton came in Krasnodar in south of Russia. And this is quite late. Was taken in 1996. This photo was taken, right? So, and this is my father, right? His father. He was quite tough man, and you can see this on this photo, right? So what else I would like to? What would be our takeaways from this? Right, that when I was growing up, I never expected the Soviet Union would ever collapse. So I kind of thought that was a reality to live with, and that was something that would last for forever, right? So my generation was not really prepared to deal with new changed reality, and this is something that can be compared with the experience of the people who lived through the Russian Civil War and Revolution, because they suddenly realized that they live in very different country, and that what happened after 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed, and some people in the former Soviet republics like Ukraine and the Baltics, the Russians, they realize that they don't live in the Soviet Union any longer anymore. So they had experience of the Soviet Union, but at the same time they never lived in Russia because they grew up like Dr. Permikov in Latvia, right, and they became now a minority in the country where they were born, and they were born in very different circumstances. So this was very transformative time to live, and many people they did well, they adopted to new situation, and for some people they struggled, and some people they never probably fully adopted to those new changes, right? Because they expected that the state would take care of everything, state would find you job once you are out of your university, or once you ready to work, and as it happened, you would have to look after yourself, and then there wasn't anyone to help you. So this was kind of traumatic experience from more or less a sort of sheltered, I mean, shielded situation. People had to act on their own, and arguably, one may say that the Soviet Union was big one prison in the sense of access to the information, in the sense of freedom of travel, right, and in the sense of freedom of self expression and things like that, right? But when you are growing up in this situation, you don't really realize it's only realities that you know. So that was something also that for many people, those things they don't matter much. They would happily trade their today's reality for what they used to have before the collapse of the Soviet Union. I wouldn't. I never would go back to the Soviet Union. Yes, I'm becoming sentimental with years about this because it's the only childhood I got. And as some people quote me, that I don't really, how to say, I don't feel guilty that God let me be born in the Soviet Union. That was not up to me where to be born and what time to be born. So I should be grateful to this. But at the same time, I don't want to idealize all those problems that the system had, and also those possibilities that people were stripped of because of the authoritarian nature of the regime. All right, so I kind of would like to rest my case here, and to take questions, and to hear from you, and maybe you have reflections, because a number of you can relate to this. You like your parents; they are about my age, I would guess. So they also had, those of you who came from the former Soviet Union, so they can relate. You can relate to what I've been talking about. Okay, yeah.
I think the oh, Oleg maybe.
No, no, you go first. I'll go.
Uh,
Hmm.
Father, I've noticed this nostalgia in many people who are kind of coming from the Soviet Union, where they'll say that speaking of material goods, there was obviously less. But they'll say stuff like people were nicer, people were kinder, there was more friendship between people. What do you think of that? What do you take of that? Is
Well,
there?
I would say that I wasn't really a good how to say pupil, right? A good student in school, and I used to miss classes, and I always felt that every adult can stop me on the street and ask me, "Boy, what do you do now? Why aren't you in school?" So it's kind of that there were strong bonds in the society, indeed. Indeed, right. But I wouldn't idealize this either. But yes, you kind of everybody could get involved with you. So that was my experience. But nicer, were people nicer? I don't know. It was quite tough also because many people went through prisoner camps, and somehow this prison culture became widespread, and there were fights in school. I remember that everyone would stand for himself in the school. We don't really support each other much, so I'm kind of having rough. My wife didn't have this experience. They're much more connected in her school, but yes and no, kind of. Yes, people can help you because when you survive, very often you can expect that somebody else would also help you, and its communal culture was stronger. You can borrow something from your neighbor quite easily, right? But at the same time, there also were those nasty elements of kind of cynical component of you try to succeed no matter what, and sometimes Christian morals that makes those things more bearable wasn't really there. I don't know if I answered.
Mhm.
Okay, Oleg.
Yes, Professor. I just wanted to point out the similarities your family had with my family,
Mm-hmm.
because my grandma as well as my mom, they grew up, and my grandma was born in 1937, and
Mm-hmm.
then um, during the war they also were sent to Ural. So just same fact. Same fact.
Right, right. Right. That was the story of many people, because
Mhm.
during the war, people kind of live similar lives. Right. The life of the people became very similar, kind of, because
Mhm.
they all like actually what we are living through right now. It's a vivid illustration. Like almost every household around the globe discuss the situation with these pandemics now. So everybody is similarly affected. Everybody is isolated. So everybody wants this to end, and that gives you idea how it was during the war, because everybody was on the same page, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So any other feedback, any other questions, anything something that maybe I missed, because the point also of this to yeah, I think the point was to give you sort of more human dimension to what we've been talking here, especially for those who haven't been really connected with daily life, I guess, in the Soviet Union. That's something that I thought might be useful to do. Right.
Father, were
Yeah.
you ever were you ever in the pioneers, the Octobrets, or the Komsomol?
Right. Right. What Anton was mentioning, when you become like 10, you join children's communist organization. So when you become, I don't know, like 12, you are a pioneer, and when you become 14, you become a member of Young Communist League. So I went through all those three leagues, but I stepped out in 1985. I left Young Communist League, right? So of my own volition, I asked that I don't want to be to remain there. So that's something that yes, I went through all those three because it was expected from every school boy and everyone in school that they would go through those initiations, right? Sort of initiations. Yes, that was my story. And also another thing that I think was quite, how to say, quite tough, I guess, it's feeling of conformity. You really need to belong to your, you shouldn't stand out from the crowd. That was another thing, and that's remain maybe the thing in even nowadays, that you should if school what I was attending, mostly there were children of military ranks, or children of officers, and that's something that I expected, that I want to be part of this crowd. So, if like my sort of Jewish background stands out, I kind of felt in kind of inferiority complex because my family was not like everybody else around me, and also everybody else was the military. I remember in one class there was a friend of mine who was on that picture the first day in the school, and he and teacher there was asking, what was your parents' occupation, and he said, well, my father is a scholar, and everybody started to laugh because, I mean, a scholar, come on, man. What kind of work is a scholar? So like everybody's like in military. That's cool, you know. That's what real man does, and he's a scholar. So this kind of was something about the Soviet Union, but I'm not sure to what extent, since I didn't grow up. I cannot sing Bruce Springsteen song. I didn't grow up in the USA, so I cannot speak about American experience, to what extent conformity is a present issue here, but that's another thing. Okay?
Когда умолкнут все песни, которых я не знаю, в терпком воздухе крикнет последний мой бумажный пароход. Goodbye, Америка, где не был никогда. Прощай навсегда. Возьми банджо, сыграй мне на прощание. Запретные плоды. Goodbye, Америка, о, где я не буду никогда. Услышу ли песню, которую запомню навсегда?